NATO is sinking. NATO is literally falling apart. The giant we all thought was unshakable is crumbling. Is this really a coincidence due to fatigue, or is someone pulling the strings behind the scenes? Friends, we are already witnessing how the Western powers are faltering, and we are doing it in real time. What exactly were we talking about? South Korea, until recently a symbol of modern democracy, with the dictatorship next door in North Korea, is now moving to impose martial law because its president decided to ignore parliament and the people. Basically, he said that here things are done his way. He is using the force of the army and they do not accept it. He is an illegitimate president. They have already asked him to resign and he does not. France, and another blow against the government of a NATO member, which can't even last 100 days before collapsing. And get ready, because this doesn't end here. Germany seems to be following the same path of self-destruction. What we are witnessing is not a mere coincidence. These governments, which have been promoting war and austerity for years, cutting budgets for society and increasing spending on weapons, are seeing how people are getting tired and rejecting that situation. But of course, there is a deep state that tries to sustain them based on authoritarianism. This is the Western democracy that they try to sell to the rest of the world. It is as if the dominoes are falling one after another, and in the end, this system that seems so solid is rapidly falling apart. Let's start with the current situation in France, because it really is an incredible chaos. Let's see what our correspondents from the Associated Press say on the spot. French deputies dismissed the government after requesting the resignation of President Emmanuel Macron with 331 votes in favor, exceeding the absolute majority of 288. The National Assembly ended Michel Barnier's term of less than 100 days, rejecting his budgets for 2025. This censure is a moral wake-up call. The majority commitment has become a sinister government in collusion with the far right. They are suffering, and this is now affecting them deeply. The success of the censure motion made the government the shortest in the French Fifth Republic, which began in 1958. And the second to fall after that of Georges Pompidou in 1962, when Charles de Gaulle was president. Without directly asking him to resign, the leader of the far-right National Rally Party, Marine Le Pen, urged Macron, with whom she competed for the presidency in 2017 and 2022, to reflect on whether he can continue in office. It is up to his conscience to decide if he can sacrifice public action and the destiny of France for his pride. It is up to his reason to determine if he can ignore the evidence of a massive popular distrust that in his case seems definitive. If he decides to stay, he will be forced to recognize that he is the president of a republic that, through his own fault, is no longer entirely the Fifth Republic. The censure does not directly affect Macron, 46, whose term ends in 2027, but it weakens him considerably, especially after having appointed Barnier as Prime Minister in the name of stability. The President, who on Tuesday described the idea of resigning before the end of his second term as a political fantasy, will address the country in a televised speech. On Thursday night, Michel Barnier's office made an announcement. He will present his resignation to the head of state this Thursday at 10 o'clock local time at the Élysée Palace. Let's see how our friend Dosser points out. Another country with martial law is on the way. The situation is collapsing before our eyes, one by one. Imagine that Emmanuel Macron, who should be the president of one of NATO's most prominent democracies, is more disoriented than a traveler without a map. Less than 100 days ago, as our colleagues in the French press revealed, he announced Michel Barnier as Prime Minister. It was supposed to bring stability to the country, but they didn't even last 3 months. Now, the National Assembly passes a motion of censure with 331 votes in favor, and Barnier is out. Why was he overthrown? This is closely linked to dissatisfaction with the NATO agenda, especially the budget they are proposing for 2025, which is a complete disaster. The proposal included raising taxes on large corporations, delaying pensions, and cut public spending, all while financing conflicts in other countries without limits. There we see Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron, very generous, throwing money at Zelensky and promising endless help when our nations are full of shortages and needs. This is a perfect cocktail for those who detest these kinds of agendas, both the left and the far right, who have historically come together to vote against it. Now Macron is more alone than ever, and his own party doesn't support him either. Imagine that. Not even his own party is behind him. This indicates that these presidents and leaders are not governed by the authority of parties or by voters, but rather obey a deep state of a small, twisted elite that dictates these global agendas, dominating the proliferation of conflicts and forcing us to pay for those weapons. And as this happens, we see that it is not just an isolated case of France. Let's remember what we discussed 2 days ago about South Korea, where President Yoon Suk-yeol decides that laws and democracy no longer apply to him, imposing martial law, ignoring parliament, and calling any protest a threat to national security. Of course, people take to the streets. The country is on the verge of an indefinite general strike, and the opposition has also filed an impeachment motion. But the damage is already done. This is another example of how authoritarian leaders are completely losing control of their propaganda and their narrative. In a scene of growing instability, France, one of the historic pillars of Europe, is facing an unprecedented political storm. Emmanuel Macron, once seen as a reformist leader, now finds himself caught in a web of unpopularity, parliamentary blockades, and social tensions. The recent motion of censure not only forced his prime minister and his entire cabinet to resign, but also left the country in a political vacuum. Macron is desperately looking for solutions, but with a fragmented parliament and increasingly strong opponents, his room for maneuver is alarmingly narrow. The chaos in France is not an isolated case. Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe, is reeling under the weight of its political fragmentation. The inability of Olaf Scholz's government to reach fundamental agreements led to early elections, fueling the perception of a democratic system in crisis. Meanwhile, Spain is facing bitter polarization and serious accusations against Pedro Sanchez, which is exacerbating the wear and tear on his government. This pattern of instability extends beyond Europe. In South Korea, authoritarian measures, such as the declaration of martial law, show how democracy can be eroded under the justification of national security. Citizen discontent intensifies with each protest, leaving the country on the verge of total political collapse. At the center of these crises, NATO appears as a giant with feet of clay. Accused of imposing agendas that prioritize external interests over the needs of citizens, the alliance faces a critical moment. The resources allocated to conflicts such as the one in Ukraine have generated deep rejection, especially when in the member countries themselves basic services are compromised. And the horizon promises even more changes. The possible re-election of Donald Trump in the United States could redraw the global political map, weakening NATO with its anti-interventionist approach. Faced with increasingly questioned leadership and a booming popular discontent, the inevitable question is, how much longer can this system that seems to be on the verge of collapse resist?